Hello and welcome to episode 3 of The Briefing Room. This week we are looking down the world of training, more importantly or more specifically, e-learning and digital design. What, from a technical standpoint, creating the e-learning and also the brain power and the sort of thinking that goes behind and solidifies the e-learning. This week I'm joined with Stephen Bromley and Austin Shand, who are looking much more smarter than me. I feel very, very underdressed. Can you introduce yourselves, give a brief sort of history about yourselves and also why you are so smartly dressed?
Well, first of all, Steve Bromley. I am CDS's Principal Learning Development Consultant, ex-services, so I served with the Education Training Services as a Learning Development Advisor, amongst various other things, having had a great career spent in the British Army, which is one of the reasons why we are here. We are at Sandhurst at the Commandant's Commissioning Parade, where we've been treated to an absolutely fantastic day and hosted brilliantly by the Project Adair team here. And then after leaving the Army, I went into various learning and development roles and have, as I mentioned, ended up at CDS, where I've worked on a whole host of projects dealing in not just digital design, but also cross-mapping of various training and development and learning frameworks. And that's me.
I am not an ex-services person, but also here for the same reason, due to the work that we were working on the Adair project. My background is a little bit more varied in the sense of I am an artist who happens to work in training. I've worked in multiple different sectors, including automotive, for BMW, defence, right the way through to several years working in the humanitarian sector and also different organisations like titanium production, etc. All of these different businesses, but they have the same sort of needs. They just change the topic that we're actually working on.
Cool, thank you. So the whole sort of behind the reason why I do this podcast is, like yourself, I'm not an ex-service. I wasn't Army, RAF, Navy. The most experience I have of the armed forces is I was in Air Cadets for 1 year. So I've jumped into this company, and some of the sort of acronyms that are thrown around, some of the places we go, that's not my area of expertise. So we have a company full of experts that have different backgrounds and are ex-services, and actually we just want to know more about some of the services we actually provide as a company and some of our experts to, well, you know these projects, you know what we need to know really. And I'm hoping that the listener will be, if they're coming from my area, that they'll sort of learn with me, and if they are sort of experts in the field, hopefully they'll agree with what you say, and it'll help build on their knowledge as well. Let's start things off with a little bit of an icebreaker. What is the best or worst e-learning that you have actually done? You've actually done as a learner?
Actually took part in?
Yeah. Best or worst?
Best or worst? Unfortunately, there's a lot that I've done that have pretty much blended into one, because they get the same classic next click, next click, next click. And as someone who puts together it, you can't help but be hypercritical, and as you're going through it, you're not only then looking at it from a learner's perspective, you're looking at it from a developer's perspective and an artist's perspective and an instructional designer's perspective. And suddenly where you sat down to do a piece, it may have been done fine, but you're now becoming a bit of a judge as you're going through it at the same time. I think for me, some of the better stuff that I saw was working in the humanitarian sector, namely because of the strength of what it had actually got from the material. It wasn't always about how well it was put together. It was about, you could tell there was a good subject matter expert that was actually helping to make that content have some substance to it. And they were very difficult topics. You'd be talking about safeguarding, you'd be like safety, well-being, the list goes on of things that you would actually be looking at, and also just how to deal with things in a crisis. So as much as I would actually throw myself into them from the fact they've been set, you've got to go and do this piece of training, it's your mandatory compliance training. I used to like just sitting through some of the topics that have been done by either colleagues or someone word of mouth has said to do, from that studious head of actually, what can I learn from that? Is it any good? Not just from the topic, but how did they put it together? What was there? And then you'll find those really good topics will come through there. So I think, although I didn't like the way it looked and it was dated and it was clawing at the strings that I wanted to update it, as a safeguarding lead at Save the Children, when I was there, they had 2 safeguarding modules, and both of them just had really, really good subject topics. And in my own part-time, I was a youth worker back in my youth in the sense as well, and it just echoed so much there of when it didn't have that training. They didn't have the infrastructure back when I'm nearly 50, so you can imagine the e-learning didn't exist as it does now. It was in its infancy of different forms. So then to suddenly see stuff coming together along those lines, tackling all the topics that it should have done 20, 30 years ago, that I like.
Yeah, I think if I had to look at good and bad, so bad straight away, it feels where there's no connection. So I don't feel like I am invested in or thought about when that learning is designed or is then delivered. It's more, as Austin says, that click-through experience. And therefore, you feel like you've been left out of the loop as the learner. Whereas the ones where I felt engaged haven't just been something where I feel it's contextualized and it's made for me, but also perhaps complex situations or concepts are broken down into something that is relatable, which when you're starting to talk about a learning process of andragogy and pedagogy being brought into the learning process, you want something that is going to be bringing on the knowledge, the information that individual has so they can relate to stuff. But at the same time, as I've got older, what I've found is when I'm dealing with complex things, the e-learning that I really enjoy engaging with is stuff that I can use multiple times, that I can then relate back to. I can then perhaps even use a second or third time, because actually it's going to help me in my learner journey so that I can have it as reference material. So I think as you get older, as you develop your own way of using that e-learning or digital learning, you do kind of engage with it in different ways. But it's our jobs to nowadays try and make it so that's that latter part of the learning process, the more engaging learning, rather than the stuff where it's just designed for the sake of design and to get something that someone can utilize. So I think that's where we stand.
I like the way you said that from as well. When you're talking about it as a revision tool, I remember on a previous project back, it was a defence thing on Project Falcon, where we were actually designing we were just hearing about things being broken. The trainers, the technicians were coming in, kit was coming off the production line, and they were just going, we've got to wait for this. And it's a distant memory, but this will lean more into your expertise. People go on rotation for their training, I believe, when they're going through it. They're only there for so long. If they haven't got the kit to train on, they miss out.
Yeah, I literally was talking with a client yesterday, and they were asking about how we, in times of austerity and things like that, how do we design for, what's the best way to design? And I was saying, well, think of it as design once, use multiple times, is that notion of like when you are investing in e-learning, think about how can I use that product again and again and again, and actually not just for that audience, but for that audience. So when designing it, you start to tailor it for those different audiences, and actually whereas perhaps you would have had to design 5 different approaches or different products, now you can design one product with 5 different ways of delivering it, and therefore actually it's more like then investing in 2 products as opposed to 5. So it's just a different way of thinking about it.
Absolutely. And there's 2 things that come from that for myself. One is I like to refer to it as design for change. Everything changes. Whether it's your policy, or whether it's someone that you decided you want to use video and they've done something untoward in the world, or they've left, or some tragedy strikes and you decide not to use them, you design for change. You look at all the elements, you're looking at it. But also going back to that one that I did on Falcon, we listened to what they were doing. Things were getting broken. We took it into a digital context, filmed everything, time synced it. It became a revision solution that they didn't know that they needed, because everyone was like, it's so hard, that memory game, to remember everything that you're actually doing on your course. Now I've got it on a DVD that I could actually look through the tasks and actually be able to do it. So it was a answer to a problem with regards to broken kit, so we can give it, but it also became, exactly like you said, a revision solution as well. So it was designed once, used for multiple purposes.
The design for change thing is ever so more pertinent for where we find ourselves now in a defence type of environment.
Yep.
Because within defence, first of all, you've got people get posted into positions, so commanders get posted into their positions every 2 years. You have a turnaround, and at all different levels. So you constantly have bits of change happening. What that tends to do is affect vision, mission, and all those sorts of things that are coming out from the command elements. But also at the same time, you have constant change in governments. You have constant change, so the political element changes. You have even localized changes. You'll have process changes, social changes.
Yeah.
So all these things then are impacting on your policies. So within the training world, our conditions and standards that we set about within the training area. So if we think about it, some change all of a sudden comes about, and now you've designed a bit of e-learning. How do you develop it? So now you're not having to completely start from scratch to redesign your learning, but actually you can make those small tweaks as you go through it to make sure that the final product is still maintains its relevance, but now has its currency in place.
And also, in the case of like the work that we're doing here, where they've called us through to the thing, we've designed not only for change, but we've designed in a way where it can be built upon. So if it works, if they're happy, everything along those lines, they can turn around and go, could we have more? And because you're designing in a way where you're designing that you can build upon it rather than just a one and done. And we're also looking at the kind of relationship after a product's produced, not just, thank you very much, there's your piece of e-learning, goodbye. It's more, how can we help? What can we do? What in relation does it come into it? What's the mood from it? What you're trying to get out of it? How do we help with the whole kind of process, not just that side?
Okay, so slightly jumping on that for the listeners at home, for the people who don't know, what is e-learning? In the context of the kind of work that you two do, someone who's not in that field or that area, what is e-learning to you two?
So I think e-learning, we both would come at it at slightly different points, and that's because of the position that we come within. For instance, if we take a learning design cycle. So learning design cycle, depending on what methodology you're learning, whether you're learning approaching it through ADDIE, or if you're going to approach it through DSAT, as we largely do with the majority of our projects, you're going to have your design or development type of period in there. So when I'm looking at it from coming into e-learning, essentially that comes in my methods and media point of view. Now, what I'll have already done, and my teams will all have done, well, they'll have going through analysis, identifying what the requirement is, and then analysing from that point and establishing what now needs to be delivered or in order to be trained into the individual so that they will be able to enact whatever it is that you are needing them to enact in order to meet the requirement. So those individuals will go through that process, and then we have to identify what is going to be the best method and method of delivering that. Now that could be classroom-based, face-to-face, it could be through a video, it could be through an e-learning process, but that will largely be established as in what you're actually trying to do. But at that point, it's where we would then hand it over to Austin and his team, and that's where they really would start to bring the magic. But it doesn't mean the analysis has stopped, because all of a sudden you're getting into the realms of having to delve down into actually, right, what is it that we're trying to do? And a lot of the work then comes and starts to take place into, right, how do we make this fit for purpose? It's got to meet the requirement. But most importantly, it has to bring about the behavioral change. I think when we go back to what we originally were talking about that good versus or positive versus negative e-learning experience, it's when you are aiming to bring about behavioral change in individuals, that's when you are entering into the worlds of positive, good e-learning.
See, exactly like he's saying there, but from the design team perspective, we've got a little bit of a flow that comes from it as well, in the sense of it's a bit of hand in glove. Because as they're doing the design and as they're coming through and probably had a brief or a project plan, it can be as detailed as we want it with ABC, or we don't know what we want, help us to get a solution, but we know what we need it to do. And that's very much where the team were there. We'd be trying to look to help from it. Our team will also be looking at it in the sense of, you only know what you know. We can actually work with them with regards to going, oh, right, okay, I can see what you're doing there. This would also work quite well. Can you do that? Yes, we could do something this way. But we'd also be asking questions with regards to where do you need it to be, what the requirements, what's the restrictions, is there a bandwidth issue, is there sensitivity in the actual content, is there a style, is there a brand, is there a look, is there a feel, is there a message, is there a mood? And I think the difference between e-learning, when I joked about me getting quite old with regards to the stuff that was back in the early days to now, we're in a time-poor world. People have seen a lot of bad. You asked us what good and bad. They've seen a lot of bad. We're fighting an uphill battle to try and show people what good is. But I think the benefit of what we can do is everything that Stephen just said there, with the balance of actually listening to the client and what all their requirements and needs are to actually produce. And I hate the term e-learning because it's so limiting, and then you're fighting with that term that everyone's seen with the bad. I think much is better, which you mentioned earlier. We refer to ourselves as the digital learning design team, which I'm the creative lead of. And although it's a mouthful, I think it's a bit more encompassing because it could be anything from a PDF, an interactive PDF, right the way through to whatever tech is actually relevant for everything they've just come through with there. And it's about making that vision a hand-in-glove process from, we know we want to do all of this, we know we want to do that, so okay, let's make it engaging as well. Let's make sure that the audience are really in that narrative, they're in that story, they're getting something from it, it's got value for them. At the end of it, they don't want to feel, oh, I've been forced to do another piece of e-learning. They want to turn around and went, I played a game, I played a lesson, I watched this really cool video, this made me laugh, but I remember the message. The classic one that I use as a reference with regards to how simple can be good sometimes is the tea and consent, which was actually done with regards to talking about sexual consent and making a cup of tea. It's used by so many different organisations and within youth groups and within schools and police and everything with regards to just explaining, a cup of tea. If someone's saying you won't want tea anymore, don't feed them tea. It's an obvious flow from it, but it's using humour for a sensitive topic in an appropriate manner. And that's a hard balance to actually get where you're listening to things.
I think with the e-learning thing is also understanding that it's not just there's one type. I think what often happens, as Austin was saying there, is like people hear the word e-learning, they automatically jump to the forcibly mandatory training where you click, click, click. Whereas actually there's a whole host of scalability within there, and I mean scalability almost in two factions, in the size of e-learning, but also the complexity of the e-learning. So for instance, you can get the e-learning that is only going to hit on your base levels if we start thinking about Bloom's taxonomy of learning and having those very base levels where you are getting that very low level of knowledge transference, up to the point where you're now getting people to be able to analyze. So at your top level, you want them to be able to analyze. You want them to be able to start to synthesize knowledge so that they can start to transfer that knowledge onwards and start come up with better ideas, better ways of doing things. But that can only happen if you are having the slightly more complex learning approach, digital learning approach. So I think that's one thing to be very cognizant of when you are talking about e-learning, is that we are talking about a whole spectrum of approach, of methods and ways of doing things.
You're also talking about accessible learning.
Yeah.
Getting people out of their workplace to sit down and go and sit in front of an instructor and do things. You'll hear so many people go, you can't beat the real thing. it's fantastic. If you've got the time to actually have an expert consistently have a good day.
The real thing will be, one, expensive, two, getting everyone to the location.
Taking them out of their job. It's not just the expense of going to the location. You're taking them out of the work that they would be doing. If they're traveling, you've got them traveling. You've got to assume they're going to get out of it what you want to get out of it. And you're also assuming that the instructor's going to have a good day and they're going to be consistent from what they did the time before.
You're bagging on the chance that the instructor's not going to be ill or cancel, and then you've got...
So one of the other things that is a big thing that came about in the humanitarian sector that we actually saw is the world's on fire. There's conflict going on everywhere, there's crises everywhere, disasters happening everywhere, and people are doing their best to be able to actually tackle it. Sometimes politics or safety mean that you cannot send an instructor into a place to go and teach.
Right.
And also there's a big factor as well is, how do you measure things? And that's the thing where metrics tend to drive a lot of things, and people will collect data everywhere. And I'd love to talk about that in a little bit later with regards to the use of data. But how do you track whether they've got it? And how do you track whether they struggled on a particular bit? And how do you track that? And if you've got a good facilitator or a good instructor in the actual room, they'll pick up on all of this when they're doing it, but they can only do it to a certain group. You hear about it with teachers, their classes get too big sometimes, and they've got 15, 20, 30, 40. How can you watch everyone when they're doing it in that time that they've got? Whereas you could be able to actually track it through a digital method. Is everybody struggling on a particular project?
But at the same time, that also leads to things like accreditation.
Yeah.
Being able to provide for that area. But seeming as as an organisation, we deal hugely with a lot of defence organisations, but also wider governmental. You also have the element of people working on shift patterns, so needing to be able to adapt to timeframes. Yeah. But one of the things that I was always very cognizant and aware of whilst I was in the army was about making sure that training was meeting that when you delivered training, that there was consistency, so that an individual who is coming on your course today is also having the exact same experience as a person coming on your course in 2 months' time, because you have to have them held to the same standards, same exposures, all that type of stuff, because at the end of the day, you are providing them with either with a qualification or with some kind of something saying that they've met the standard. So therefore there needs to be standardization. And one of the great things about digital learning is that you can create that standardization so that every single person is getting that same information constantly, and that they have all been taught to that same level.
And the thing I love about what you just picked up there, again, people on different time zones as well as time shifts that they're actually doing, you're giving people the choice to be able to do it in their own time. And being able to actually engage with things in your own time means that
flexibility.
You can have that flexibility to pick up on it. And also, this is another thing which probably brings us on to another topic, in the fact of so many buzzwords get thrown around. You get gamification, you get micro-learning, you get e-learning itself. You can stand here for
bite-sized learning.
Bite-sized learning. There are a lot of the things are the same sort of things that have been done for years.
Yeah.
It's like I use the analogy of going back to we aren't doing much different from what cave paintings and stories around a campfire is. This is what you can hunt. This is what will eat me. This is where I am safe. This is warm. And if anything, they've got a better data storage system than lots of people because it's still there in the cave thousands of years later. But the principle is being able to actually put it so that people can access it when they can. And on top of that, I know we said about instructors can have a bad day and you've got that consistency. The bit that I was picking up from there is it brings you then into one of the other buzzwords, which is blended learning, right, where what you'd actually use is e-learning or digital learning kind of tools, which you then use to support the instructor or the trainer or the facilitator in the room to help them to have that consistency or to have resources they would never have access to in the room, but suddenly they can.
So would e-learning or digital learning, we'll call it digital learning from now on, can digital learning sort of replace an entire classroom like module or sort of lessons, or is it a blended learning is the better outcome, or do you think digital learning has its place, but it's mainly classroom?
100% it depends.
Okay.
To me, from the standpoint of it's what you're trying to get out of it. So when you are designing for learning, it's about the student. And I think that's one thing that we probably haven't talked enough about in this, is the fact that it's all about the student and what is their learning experience going to be about,
Okay.
and how are we going to transfer that knowledge to that individual that we might eventually bring about behavioural change. And that could be behavioural change in their knowledge, behavioural change in their actions, whatever it's going to be. Now, often you find that people go, oh, we'll come up with a digital solution to it. But they haven't thought, does this suit a digital solution? And there are instances where, we've had clients come to us and we've had to say to them, yes, we can do digital here, but this is what you will lose. Because you have gone for this digital solution, you're going to lose the ability, for instance, for the student to be able to ask why.
Okay.
The student to be able to ask the question as to, well, why is it like that? How is it like that? Why do we do it this way? But as long as the client or the deliverer is going to know that that is something they're going to lose out, so therefore we're going to have to come up with a solution as to how we deal with that, then that's fine. We can come up with those solutions, but it's being aware that you are going to lose out on something by going down the digital pathway, and therefore you're going to have to come up with different solutions to solutionize that. Also, at the same time, as Austin said, often it'll be like, right, we're going to come up with the digital solution. Well, is your environment best suited for that? I remember my time in the army and being approached to design a digital help support in the design of a digital armory. So that was three-dimensional design of weapon systems, the SA-80 rifle and some other elements. So we went about helping support in that. And one of the things we drove on, both to the people who were helping support us, the organisation that was supporting us, as well as to those people we were briefing about this electronic armory, was the fact that this isn't the solution. It is part of a solution to it. So it is another tool for instructors to use, rather than sitting there going, this is going to be the panacea that's going to solve all your problems. Because the reality is soldiers need to have hands on the weapons. Yeah. They need to be able, and that was understanding what you lose, what you gain, but also what the requirement is. At the end of the day, you want soldiers who can carry a rifle safely and fire a rifle down a range, hitting a specific grouping, and therefore be able to provide that function to the army and that requirement. So we hadn't lost that vision when we were doing it. And I think that's important, understanding that we are using digital design for a purpose, and whether that's going to be as a tool or whether it's going to be, whether it may solve the problem, but sometimes it doesn't.
And funnily enough, in the project, why we're here today, what we got invited through with the Adele, one of the games that we've actually put through that is we recognise the fact that you're losing that person in the actual room. So we introduced a, for lack of a better word, it's a guide from the side or a virtual assistant. Somebody jokingly called it almost like the Clippy thing that you would get. So we made sure it was better than Clippy. Okay. But it was generally where you lack that kind of extra bit of lived experience that comes through where people can make a decision, that guide from the side can give you that bit of sage, bit of knowledge of this is why you're doing it. This is how that impacts the wider thing. So you're not taking them out of the narrative, you've still got that aspect that's coming through.
But I think if we look to Sandhurst and what the benefit of the digital package that we designed for them, particularly within the gamification element that we designed, what that was doing was providing Sandhurst with something that they didn't have before. So one of the things that Sandhurst has always had an issue with is how do you help a young second lieutenant or officer cadet to become a second lieutenant practice in front of soldiers for the first time when they have never had that opportunity, because you don't want them to be making necessarily or putting into practice what they've learned and potentially making mistakes in front of their soldiers, potentially losing respect or making some decisions which could impact on lives and so on and so forth. So it was almost that ability to provide them the opportunity to, first of all, apply critical thinking, which was vital, but also, secondly, it was to provide them with a safe space where they could make mistakes if needed, but at the same time apply what they'd learned and put it into practice in a real life style scenario, which was actually something that they couldn't get through the traditional face-to-face learning styles. So actually, just as I was saying, like how sometimes the digital learning can't replace what's in the classroom, at the same time, there are times when the digital classroom wouldn't be able to replace what the digital learning can provide. So
then on the digital learning side, so some of the people who listen to this may have only just experienced click next. Congratulations, you've now done this course, you know everything there is about this subject. What are, not limitations, but what are the different avenues of digital engineering, not digital learning? What's actually doable?
To be honest, the imagination is what is the limiter, and also what restrictions the client's got.
Okay, so would there be just a case of making a PowerPoint, or is there, you talked about filming earlier or recording, doing interactive videos? You
would be able to list out so many different things. I mean, one of the face-to-face lessons that I used to do when I was going into organisations, when I was working in them, they'd reel me in as the creative lead or design lead, and it's a lot of people make the same mistake where they'll put together PowerPoints and they're just dry, or they're not capturing things, or everyone's had that death by PowerPoint situation. But not just that, they'll stick images in and they won't understand copyright, they won't understand the legality, it'll be a mess. It's going out to see clients or VIPs, and it's just not got that same face of what they would want to do, and they go, just give us a quick tour and a little kind of lesson. One of the first things I would do in that lesson would actually be put 2 clip charts at the front of the room and just go, right, your team awesome, your team fabulous, go and list every forms of media that you think you could actually do to actually teach people or train or to actually put a message across from marketing. And then they would go through it and they would use all these different things, and then I'll go, be as creative as you can. We'll find a use case for it afterwards. Be as creative as you can. And then they'll come up with all these different things. Bearing in mind they don't know what the topic is that they want to create it for yet. We're just looking at all the different avenues.
Right.
And as they do that, for me, I'm watching the characters in the room. So I'm learning from it as well. I'm listening, I'm watching, I'm learning, I'm seeing what they're writing down. And then I'll tell them it's a competition, and because they're already thinking you can cheat if you want to, but it's not a competition. I've given no rules, and you see them turn, and I learn the new characters in the actual space as well. So for me, I'm always listening, always learning, always picking up on stuff, whether it's face-to-face, sitting in a room, even though I do the digital, there's so much that crosses over that I'm trying to mimic, replicate, improve. But then what I'm also looking at is all the different avenues of what people's imagination can come up. Somebody put a plane with a banner behind it, and they all started going, oh, that would work. And I went, give me a use case for it. And someone went, oh, you're on the beach. Perfect. Don't go in the waters, the sharks.
Yep.
It's just, actually, that's a really good use case for it. And it's like, so where you ask the limitations of it, you've got the classic things where you would build out something that you need to do. And this is where you come into things like SCORM and TinCan and API, where you would want to have it measured and it would live on a learning management system. And that may dictate the way that you actually create it, because they've got a need to track that data somehow to be able to see what's going on. People need a learning record. It could be that what you need to get out of it, going through what we've been talking a lot on this, is we just need them to get it. And if they need to get it, then we're looking at who the audience is, we're looking at the topic, we're looking at sensitivities, and that's where it could be a video, it could be an animation, could be a piece of e-learning, could be a piece of blended training, it could be a piece of micro, to use the term, where you're actually just trying to do it. It could be a picture, just to get the mind thinking.
So a question for both of you, from your sort of different aspects from it, or different angles. With younger people coming through the military, and we do in defence, we work predominantly with defence. Are you seeing a change in the kind of media or digital learning or ways of like their learning? Are you seeing differences in that, or is it predominantly the same, just packaged slightly different?
Well, I think having experienced a number of years of having seen people come in throughout my career, people would talk to me about, oh, these young guys coming through, they're going to be more tech savvy.
Yeah.
Well, actually, what tech savvy are they? That's the reality. Is we are talking about. So when it came to the DA game, one of the things that we found ourselves doing is moving to a more hyper realism approach, because of the exposure that these guys are going to have to, get your like EA games and things like that they're exposed to in their normal lives. However, if you actually think about a lot of the technology, they aren't necessarily exposed. If you ask them how to set up various systems, or how certain things work, they'd be able to tell you how to install the app, but they wouldn't tell you necessarily how a phone works. And this is the difference, is the knowledge that they are given and being provided with. It's a very different type of knowledge that they're receiving. And therefore, our learner, yes, they are more tech savvy, but in a different way. And actually, you see that when it comes to defense procurement. So when they are sitting there thinking about, whereas before it would have been pull out a laptop and now you're going to fly a drone around. But what we find with a lot of our soldiers now is actually where they've been coming, and from their experience, they no longer have the need to retain large quantities of information in the same way we did it in the past. So if I look at a sergeant major or a person who's a sergeant major now, when they were a lance corporal, they would have been required to reel off bits of information like that, and they would be able to almost digest an entire soliloquy or bit of text to be able to brief someone or tell someone about. Nowadays, that requirement hasn't really gone from the military standpoint, but actually the ability for our people to do that, because they no longer need to do it, because they get asked a question, they can merely pick up their phone, chat GPT it, or go to Google, and they've got the answer right there at their fingertips. That has been a bit of a game changer in the way that now we approach our learning. So actually, we now need to think of the learning as being a bit, providing not just necessarily bite-sized bits of information, but also do we also need to provide them with the ability for that reach back to get information and bring that forward to better inform them, so that they're actually backed up with the knowledge base, so that they're less reliant on just pure memory base, but actually, and it's finding that balance, because the reality is that defense will always have a requirement for people to be knowledgeable, to retain information, and to be able to talk with authority on whatever they are, as they will become the SMEs of the future. But the reality is, we can't just expect them to pick it up like that. So with here, Sandhurst is effectively taking people who have come from, their last education might have been school, it might have been university, but they're now coming into this environment, and they're not necessarily going to be 100% skilled at that automatic retention of information.
And the other thing, just to lead in on that one as well, is people are time poor. Everyone is culturally, you ask about young people with words, what's changed, in the sense of very much that I've got my phone, I'll chat GPT it, or I'll Google it, and you're just talking to your phone as opposed to typing it in. Everything is as quick as you can possibly get it to be, but nobody fact checks. No. And this goes full circle back to what we were talking about, where we've got subject matter experts and experts that we would lean into to give it that validation of actually making sure that information is correct. Not only from the expertise that we've got, far too many years for myself, and you've got your years that you've put in from that side, being able to dip into these bits to make sure it's got that validation of actually what's going on. And actually, it's not just about a quick bit of info, making it accessible. It's about making sure that it's fact-checked, topical, and if it's sensitive, it's been dealt with in the right way to be able to actually address the topics without that coldness that can come across.
But at the same time, what that then brings into it is the fact that because you have those subject matter experts, but also the legal, it might be legal advice, it might be medical advice, it might be whatever the case is for that particular bit of training, which is essentially your conditions and standards that you're now setting out. What that provides also is buy-in, because all of a sudden you're providing it with this like almost real world filter that the individual is now able to kind of realize, actually, there's a reality to this. There's something that's going to back us up. And I think that's one of the other things and I remember when we first started engaging with Sandhurst, the Adair team as the clients, that was very much one of their points of view was, and likewise when we started talking to the recruits here about what their expectations were and what their needs were, was the fact that for them it was about, not just being presented some information and then having to accept it. It was that thing of buying into it, was that thing of believing in what they were doing, and therefore it has to have that realism, it has to have that standard to it.
You're quite right. And the subject matter, so to use the context of the Adair games that we were doing, is we used legal, we used the CABS department, we used serving and veteran soldiers, even right the way down to using veterans' voices for the characters. Even though we're blending AI and traditional skills, we're still trying to capture that essence of that storyteller, that narrative, that believability that comes through from it. And having that whole plethora of tools to be able to do exactly like you're actually saying means it goes back to, again, of how do you do that piece of e-learning? And that's why you always smile, because you go, there's so much more to it. But just the one thing really quick on that is, all those subject matter experts may really know their subject fantastically well. They may not be instructors. They may not have the ability to take that knowledge that they've got and pass it across. They may be that person that's got 20, 30, 40 years of expertise, lived experience, and then what it is the skills of being able to draw that from them in a way that you say in a generational, to put it into that time-poor way, what medium we use, what tools we use, what look and feel we use. How do we validate it by making sure that that person who's got that lived experience isn't passing on bad habits, and we're actually looking at what good looks like. And I like to refer to it, and I hate using coin phrase, but I always end up making phrases eventually because you have a habit. You are really trying to do little moments that matter within what's actually coming through. As small as you can make it actually be, so it's not a memory game, but at the same time substantial enough that people understand that they actually get what the message is.
Are you finding then, with the generational change, that attention spans, because now you've got bite-sized learning in your pocket, on your phone, everywhere, are you finding from a design perspective you have to make courses sort of shorter and having more bite-size, or how are you keeping attention spans for, if someone's used to only doing like 2 minutes video on their phone, are you implementing anything inside your games? Like take the Adair game, for instance, is there anything you're implementing into it to sort of either make it more bite-sized, or how do you keep their retention and make them want to do the next module and not just, oh, I have to do this, click next. They actually want to.
One of those interesting things, and those of us who have children would be able to test, and having watched our children play video games, and even like my child can sit and play a video game and then 30 minutes has passed and they feel like 2 minutes. That old theory of relativity, old governs. But the idea behind it is the child is sitting there, they're so engaged. And that's that keyword, engaged. So this is about engaging them. So you could make the lesson 5 hours long if you needed to, because their brains are tapping into a different way of approaching learning. Now, when I remember going through my educational training and them talking about, making sure that you keep the lessons that you're going to be running in short bursts, so that you're keeping that engagement factor all the time. But the reality is, with gamification, and we see this in video games, is the fact that it's about triggering those endorphins, getting people so they're constantly being engaged. Now, at the same time, you don't want to overexcite them because they'll stop remembering what they're actually learning. But this is about, like, particularly when we talk about the gamification that we did for Sandhurst, it was about how do you get them kind of engaging in a way that they're making those decisions. They want to make the next decision. Actually, when you give them, for instance, a timed, so some of the elements we had as timed decisions that individuals had to make. Well, that's now putting a pressure on the individual, gets the endorphins running, they're having to make a decision, they make a decision, is it the right decision? And then you have reward. So that's the thing. It's balancing that, and that kind of plays into your whole keeping that engagement.
There was a great line when we were testing it on that kind of side. They were going, I had to sit and listen to what was going on, and I had to take part in the story. I just wanted to click through. And then straight after it, he went, I'm glad I didn't, because I was able then to actually understand why it was relevant as I was coming through from the rest of it. But their instinct right off from the bat was that scroll, that click, that press, too long, didn't read. But it wasn't. They were just got the habit, because as soon as they realised that they weren't able to actually click through and they took on what was going on, they realised how relevant it was. And then it was about getting that pacing that could actually come through, where we were aware culturally and generationally, and this is what I'm going to say, this isn't just young people. How many times would you put your hand up yourself if you just go, I've just skipped past something because it was too long, or it's too slow, or I wanted to watch something and a website didn't load or something, and you just go straight to another one. We've been conditioned this way, the way that everything is in that kind of structure. So we think that young people are going to actually do it. We're doing it ourselves. So we can't just look at it in the sense of one size fits all. We're trying to think of it as, okay, from young people, they may have this as their kind of focus of skills that they've brought into it, and they've got a level of expectation. At the same time, you don't want to alienate the person who's 30, 40 years in that still needs to learn the same content. How do you balance and blend that content to make it so that they can do it around their jobs and also have that same level of interactivity? So using the game kind of aspect from there, we would use rewards. It is a very simplistic game, because one of the things that we do is we listen. And it's the most important thing is listening, and we're not gamers, was the term. And it's like they wanted the game, but we're not gamers. We get out, we run around, we do this stuff. We may have gamers amongst us, but we're not predominantly gamers. So what we're trying to do is use game-like elements, but strip it down so that you're not having to teach people how to play a game. Yeah. You're straight into the actual topics. You're doing it very lightweight with regards to what's going on. If it made sense, you could build upon that. You could expand out from that. You can do different elements. If, again, and this goes back to stuff that you were saying earlier, Stephen, if it makes sense to use those kind of elements and use those tools and those kind of resources, that you would dip into it. You can go to any conference and everyone's like VR, 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 augmented, VR, VR, VR. It's almost like it's on repetition. Yeah. But what people very rarely do, and if you take an expert, like if you were to take like Stephen and I in there and we suddenly go, what have you used it for? And why did you use VR instead of blah?
Just a new flashy tool. Look, it looks really cool.
It can be, but it could also be the best tool for that actual use. But a lot of the time what you'll actually hear is it'll be
an expensive gimmick.
And what you'll get is a lot of people actually saying to actually do that. But when you look at environments as well, is it the best tool for that environment that they're actually going to take it into?
I think what Austin's getting there is that whole thing of what we talk about when we talk about the requirement, about making sure that the requirement is met. The reality is, and I've seen this both from learning perspective, but also from like capabilities perspective. So, all of a sudden, nice shiny bit new kit arrives. How do we start using that? I was working at an establishment in the military, and they got a load of like interactive whiteboards. Amazing, great.
The smart boards, yeah.
But they didn't train anyone on them. So what ended up happening is those whiteboards just sat there for yonks until someone decided, right, we're going to start training some people on these. And then they started utilizing them, but probably still not to their full utility, because it was now the horse had already bolted. It was now a case of, well, we're trying to find a way to use them, as opposed to we need a solution to this problem. And once you start looking for the solutions, so if you know that you have you've got an issue and you need a training solution for that problem, potentially training isn't the only solution to that problem, but let's say it is one of the solutions, well then that gamification may be the solution for it, and therefore looking at a digital solution within the training, well that's where this comes in, and therefore it might potentially be the right solution.
And how many times have you seen it where somebody's gone, we need a piece of training, and it's because they've said it, but they're more to the point, we need a piece of digital learning, or to use the phrase that we're dropping, we need a piece of e-learning. And then when you dig into it, and it's like, yes, you do, but you don't need this bit that's going to sit like this. What you need is an animation that's going to explain this. You need this bit that's going to come from here. And that's where the strength for particularly like teams like with us of what we're actually doing is we work hand in glove to be able to actually look at it and go, okay, what's their problem? What's their requirements? What's their restrictions? What's their need? And a lot of the time people don't always know what their need is from the user's perspective, but they may know from an organizational perspective what the problem or the issue is that we need to tackle, but we don't know how to get to the actual solution. And that's where you can help find that right one to come to it.
Yeah, I think when we're looking at these things, and me and a previous colleague, we always used to talk about the fact that we would. Training is a solution. It might not be the solution for this problem though, but it may well be. So often we would look at it and go, right, let's apply a bit of root cause analysis. Rather than trying to fix the symptom, let's try fix the problem. This often training, people go, oh, we need training course for that. But actually, and this is why within the DSAT process, what we often look at is we identify the scope. What is it that needs to be solutionized here? What's the problem? What is the thing that needs fixing? And therefore, how do we create a solution around it? And then we identify, it might be the role or whatever it is. And then of that role that person's now going to be involved in, or that capability that's now going to be created, what parts of that then need a training solution? And then is that training solution going to be fit? And this is when we start coming to the realms of, well, now we need a digital solution. Or do we need, as was mentioned earlier, like the face-to-face solution or a blended approach? But we only understand that once we've already established, well, this is the real problem. This is the real, or maybe not necessarily problem, but real solution. And therefore, that's what we can work towards. So, and therefore, that's why requirement setting becomes so important in this game, because otherwise you're just designing something for the sake of designing it. And, of course, if you're designing for the sake of designing, you're still going to do a cracking job. But at the end of the day, will it solve the problems that you're trying to get it to solve? Not necessarily.
So there was a big meeting that I had, I remember when we were this was back on Falcon, I believe, which was a defence-based one. I'm going to say 20 years ago now, probably, again, showing the grey in my beard. But the key thing was, I remember we were talking through, e-learning was quite early then. And I'm going to use e-learning then because this was the actual kind of very much as it was back then, the next click. You're using software that wasn't really fit for it. You're using technology that was still learning. You're using methodology that we were just breaking the ground to be able to actually come into this new kind of sphere to put it up. And LMS systems, learning management systems with regards to that as well, we're still fairly new and in their infancy. And there was a lot of apprehension as whenever any new tech comes through. You got it with AI now, and that's a whole new conversation. But there's tools in the belt that's actually coming through from there. But you just having that room and people were sniping at me. They felt threatened at their job. I've been asked to demonstrate what we were actually doing. We were putting e-learning together. We were doing all the kit that they can actually do, all the lessons that you can imagine from here. And they thought it was going to replace the instructors in the room. And also replace the developers that are doing the filming and all these sort of things. And I remember when it was coming through and I explained, if all you need is a piece of paper and a pen to put your point across, use a piece of paper and a pen. However, I may write this on a piece of paper and a pen with Stephen and then go, this is great, we should share this with Karl. He's never going to understand our scribbles, let's tidy it up. So we tidy it up, we probably put it into a Word doc. There you go, Karl. What's that? You go, fantastic. Could we share this with the wider team? Yeah. But let's turn this into a PowerPoint. It makes it easier to present. So now we've got a PowerPoint and we've scaled it up into a PowerPoint. And like, okay, that's fantastic. But we need one of us to stand there and present it each time. All right, let's turn it into a video. That way we can capture it and we can have that same energy we've got. So now we've got a video. But did they get it? Okay, so now we need to measure whether they get it. So now we're probably going to go, all right, so let's put some questions there. How do we put some questions? Oh, we could do it in a piece of e-learning, so we can actually do it from that side. Okay, fantastic. Now we've got the e-learning. Are they getting it all right? Are they struggling on the thing? Well, let's see what questions they're getting wrong. It scales and scales and scales. If you did bring that into the modern day, we'd go, let's use the VR that we were just talking about. Is it VR that we go to the solution? It may be. But you've looked through all these different elements that has actually come through it first. And also then you're actually scaling it into the sense of what's the best solution for the learner. And I remember a phrase that I actually said in that same one, it's not for you unless you're the learner. It's for them. It's our job to put the best solution on the table for them to be able to retain the knowledge and apply it. And how we actually do that means we've got a whole swath of tools in our disposal, in our tool belt. We've got to pick the right one, and we're going to do that by listening.
The reality is, when we look at training, the reality is 40, 50 years ago, what was their method of teaching? You had an overhead projector, and you basically had a person in the classroom to deliver a lesson. That was, yes, you had other means that you could do a video or something like that, but traditionally it was like, how do you do effective training? And it would be seen as you need someone who is there, who is going to be able to facilitate that. Now, as technology has grown and we are able to use these things, we should be using them. Whether we should always be using them is a question, and this is where it comes down to whether it's fit for purpose. And you only identify if it's fit for purpose from having done the analysis, but also sitting there and see what suits the customer best. So, for instance, as we were saying earlier, if I'm trying to deliver, let's say, submarine training to people, I've got people who are underwater for long periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
They're in small confined spaces. What is the accessibility going to be to, and how often can you get those people? They're going to be working on shifts. They're going to be working in a whole host of things. You could even apply the same kind of concepts to training on a cruise ship. It's that same kind of notion of you want to train people, but how can you get access to those people? What suits that organization the best? And it might be a case of, right, well, we create our own little internal system, put some internal hard drives on the ceiling and through Wi-Fi, and people can access it by having a code, and they get into it. They just jump on there and they can access a few, whether it's games or videos or whatever it's going to be.
Or they play it through their own kind of laptops.
Yeah.
And then as soon as they come to where they're not actually thing, bam, it kicks back up. There's loads of and this goes back to the listening. What's the need? What do they need it to do? And again, I think when people go, we need a piece of eLearning, I'd much rather if people come up and go, we've got a thing that we want to solution. And I don't want to say problem, because it could be anything from positive to compliance through to whatever your actual need is, and then turning around and going, we've got a need, how would you tackle it? And being able to come across from that, in that sense, is exactly like you say. What's your requirements? You're in a submarine. You're you're underwater. You're doing all of this. Our minds, I know mine was, as I was sat here just going, this. These are all the things. And also visually, I'm looking at what would I want to actually do for them that they could actually pick up of in this environment where they're probably under artificial light all day. The last thing they want to do is see more artificial light simulated. You want to try and make it so it's a bit more stimulating for them to actually want to do it. So you're leaning into the art as much as you're leaning into the technology, in the sense of most people think, we'll just get some software and we'll do it. No, there's a whole kind of cultural thing as well, if you're going to do it globally, that you're actually designing for, and languages that you will actually be designing for, the way things are laid out, right the way down to the nature of the topic of what you're actually delivering, the people that you put into it, how you're actually doing it. You mentioned earlier we used hyperreal characters in the game. We used hyperreal characters because the whole general gist of it didn't make sense to make it too cartoony.
No.
We wanted it to have that engagement, another word that you actually used there, for people to actually feel like they were immersed in the game. The environments themselves.
So the buy-in.
The buy-in's there on that side, so you're straight away into it.
I have been told I'm going to regret this question. I'm looking at you. So you've mentioned a few times DSAT, the word DSAT. Even from a training background, I don't particularly know what DSAT is. I've always nodded and gone, oh yes, DSAT compliance, that's great. Can you quickly explain, even if it's an elevator pitch, I'm going up 5 different floors, can you explain to me in about 40 seconds what DSAT is?
So DSAT is basically a methodology of training. In effect, there's multiple elements to DSAT because there's lots of different training elements, but it's the defense system approach to training, and essentially what it's looking at is the analysis, all elements of a learning methodology. Now, for me, when I am sitting there looking at DSAT, often in my military career, when I would go and talk to various people, it was always seen as a bit of a dark art, and therefore people kind of tried to move away. But the reality is all you're trying to do is make training compliant, safe, but ensuring that there is the rigor, the academic rigor and controls in place to make sure that you are receiving a product that is going to ensure that your people are meeting the right training requirements. That's it pretty much in a nutshell. DSAT for Defence obviously has additional kind of areas of protection around it, in the fact that you're looking at mitigating more risk and all that type of stuff. But in effect, it's making sure that, for instance, the product that that is being delivered to the recruits or to the soldiers or to whoever it's going to be meets a requirement which is set out by the requirements authorities, your training requirements authorities. So as long as you are making sure that you're doing all your checks and balances through the analysis phase, the design phase, and then of course the delivery phase, you are then wanting to make sure that you assure the whole process, both through first, second, and third party assurance, to make sure everything is compliant. And as long as those 4 phases really, so your analyze, design, delivery, and assurance is taking place, you will have your compliance. Now, there's lots of little nuance in there, but that's it in a nutshell. When we're designing training, often, so for instance, Adair, we were not necessarily brought in at the start of the DSAT process, which would be your analyze stage. So for us, there was certain analytical work we had to do, but that was more from a cross-mapping point of view, for bringing the Army Leadership Code into the Santos program. But at the same time, what we were trying to do is then take what was already in the Santos program and then draw that through almost a DSAT lens to make sure that what was going into the course or into the game, into the game actually could be seen. So essentially we're trying to create those golden threads so that you can sit there and go, this moment that happens in the game is a direct line to the requirement that's there, so that we know that when the person is completing the game, they are doing learning that is beneficial and meets the requirements. And that to any training requirements authority or training design authority or delivery authority, what they're really interested in is making sure that they are meeting the requirements. And therefore, it's largely our job to make sure that the game or another bit of e-learning or digital design, or if it's going to be classroom-based learning, is going to meet that requirement.
Okay.
That's a long 40 seconds.
It wasn't. Yeah. Don't worry, I was counting it down.
I've missed my stop, and I've yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you work closely with SMEs, subject matter experts? Say there's a project that comes in and the subject matter experts' content is pretty dense, or pretty just walls and walls and walls of text.
Perfect use case for you on that one.
How's your approach? How do you handle that?
After you first.
So thanks. So funny enough, when I first started working with the company, I had a great instance where I had to do this, and I had to work with some lovely scientists on a project which was a fairly substantial piece of equipment that we were going to design some training for as far as a maintainer was concerned. And I sat down with these individuals and they started going through all this, and because I was like, right, I want to understand, what does the individual need to do? And they went, right, this piece of kit. And they spoke to me for half an hour. It's great, lovely bit of information. But afterwards, he stopped, took a breath, and I went, oh, so you turn it on? And he went, yes, but it's so much more complicated than that. And he spoke for another half an hour. And at the end of that half hour, so I said, so he turns it on. And he went, yep, basically. So I was like, fantastic. So that's the start. So he turns it on. So that's the thing. Our job is to sit there and push past all the noise. The people in your head, if you're an SME, you have
You're passionate about
you have so much passion for what you do, so much understanding and wider understanding. And now you've actually started to create your further understanding because you've been working in that area for a set period of time. So you also have what other elements you've gleaned in and brought in. So you've made this almost your super subject. And therefore, there's so much you want to tell about it. But at the end of the day, it needs to be broken down. And like from an analysis point of view, it has to have a start point. So we will take it down to that very start, that very process of like, so what's the person doing? And therefore, by helping them break it down, we're able to come out with actually now what needs to be trained. So I think that's one of the things. SMEs are invaluable. Without them, we couldn't do our work. There is no way we could deliver a product to a client without an SME input. They are kind of the lifeblood of every project. However, there is that element of we are the SMEs in training, they are the SMEs in what they do, and therefore it's that balance between ourselves that actually develops a great product at the end of the day.
They are the experts in whatever it is. We are the experts in taking what they know and then helping other people to understand it. A great use case of where I remember seeing it is a subject matter expert. We'd already beaten up this content to its rawest form of not quite they turn it on because we've still got a massive chunk. And they're saying it's still super relevant. I don't want to cut it down anymore. And you're going to meet things like that because people are passionate about it and they don't want to do it anymore. Now I'm putting the creative head on and it's like, okay, we're doing a podcast of this content of two people talking about the topic so that we take this chunk of text that you're trying to do and we're turning it from what would be a good 20 minutes of digital learning into a 2-3 minute podcast. And it was just taking that context, flipping it, making it into a conversation and doing exactly like going, maybe add humour. So you turn it on, your audience are engaged, they're picking up on it, they'll smile, they'll laugh, but they'll remember it.
Do you, because you've worked on many projects, making something sort of bite-sized or trying to translate that to something that the learner will actually like take in, do you find over the years you've actually learnt quite a lot, or do you have like, when you start in a new project, everything you just learned on the last project sort of drains from your brain, or do you weirdly know a lot of facts about a lot of projects that you've worked on that you wish you could forget?
So me personally, anything that I've seen, I will remember because I've got a good visual memory. Right. So if I've seen it, I'll remember it. However, I'm going to talk generally about the actual role from a kind of side as a digital creative on that side. I think you end up gleaming lots of information as you're actually putting through it. Some you'll not switch off to, but especially if the content is very sensitive or just emotional. You can have some very sensitive topics you can pick up of like there was one which pediatric blast injuries for children that we were doing on that one. So you can imagine the people developing that, the content is quite graphic, the content is quite emotional, it takes an impact on the person developing it. But this is again where having a good team around you that you can actually work with, where they can pick up on that, you can talk through it, you can ask questions, they can support you on it. And also being aware right up front, we're going to deal with a sensitive topic now. We deal with exactly that in the Adair game. We've got topics in there that are sensitive and we've turned around and gone, trigger warning.
So one of my questions was going to be about when creating digital learning and sort of looking at behind the analysis and sort of structuring it together, when it's about a sensitive subject, does that sort of change your mindset of how you think displaying something to someone would be different from like if you're just going to assemble a car? That's a pretty sort of like, you can do videos and stuff. Whereas if it's more of a sensitive subject, how do you handle that?
So I'd say like from the ex-military people, particularly within this context, for instance, a lot of the elements in it were based on real scenarios. So, like, for instance, they aren't like necessarily that thing happened like that, but we have all been exposed to them. So, like myself, when I was a junior officer or even a senior officer doing field officer duties, and you'd get the phone call and something had happened at a training estate or in some on a camp or whatever it was, and you had to deal with it. You know, there's a certain way of dealing with it, and you're very much trained into it. So an understanding of how to handle these also from an analysis point of view about how to bring those into the training requirements of what we were dealing with. You know, we had the contextualization to be able to do that, but at the same time, you understand the processes that are in place. And actually, from a defense point of view, defense is very good at sitting there, seeing a scenario, seeing something happen, and breaking it down into a process that needs to be followed. But at the end of the day, just as we always remember that there's a learner, you know, when there's an incident, there are human beings involved. So there are sensitivities that you want to have within that. And as Austin mentioned earlier, like, you know, sometimes we need to put a trigger warning into something for instance, like, you know, if we were talking about sexual misconduct, you know, someone who has experienced that sexual misconduct, you know, there needs to be a certain element of preparation to allow those people to understand that they're going to be dealing with this sensitive issue. And therefore, if they are someone who's gone through it, there's certain precautions you need to have. At the same time, you want to make sure that when it comes to Austin and the team doing the digital side of the development of it, that, you know, you want to deal with that incident as with the respect it deserves, because actually we are talking about, once again, even though you are talking about virtual people, it's as I said, it's based on real life scenarios. So therefore, you want it to be respectful in that case.
So I can give you a case in the sense of we cannot control how resilient someone is as an audience. So when we're writing stories for the games and the narratives have elements that's coming through, or any piece of training that you're actually trying to do, we do not know who's going to play it necessarily. If you've got a worldwide audience or a tight audience, some people may be water for a duck's back, don't care. Other people, they may have lived experience or trauma based on some of the topics that we're actually going through or going to touch on. So we will do a warning, a trigger, something along those lines. But also, it would be Stephen could turn around, or someone in his team can turn around to someone in from our side and go, this is dealing with X. And it's like, it's a sensitive topic, and this may trigger people, or people may have lived experience. We want to talk about it. We want to train on it. This is what we need them to have. How can we do it? And you have to treat it on a case-by-case basis with regards to how you're going to deliver it, and also what you want to show and what you don't want to show. You don't need to show things sometimes because people can actually see it. You can go back to the old school ways of movie making, in the sense of the theatre of the mind. The imagination can actually help tell the rest of the story without showing something graphic. You don't need to go to that detail. You could actually just explain with a narrator's voice that this happens.
But I'd say also at the same time, and this Austin was hitting on this slightly here, is the fact that the training has a purpose, which is to train soldiers or train young officers in this case to be prepared for that type of eventuality. So you have to, it's a fine line of being sensitive and not being overly sensitive to it. So you have to still be preparing them to deal with these sorts of incidents. There was someone I was recently talking to about this type of gamification and bringing it in. And one of the things that we were talking about was that helping lift the fidelity of traditional training, and as opposed to actually having to do the role. And within traditional training, you are taught something and it can be quite straightforward. Yes, there are different levels of training that a person can experience, but if you are taught in a very kind of classroom-based, here's a PowerPoint, I've explained it to you, now go off and deliver that. And let's say it's something to do with crisis management. and that person is having to be on duty, and that telephone rings. First time that telephone rings, that person is going to be kind of, oh my God, panic stations, it's happening now. Whereas actually, using something like the game, they can sit there and go, right, I've had to put my training into practice. I've now gone through a couple of scenarios based on this, and therefore the phone's rang. Then there's now a slight detachment in the fact that they've been through it already. So they can pick up the phone, yep, all right, great, we're going to deal with it this way, and they can now start following the processes that they've been taught because they've had an experience of doing it. Whereas if the person's never experienced it, the first time they're going to actually have to do that, there is consequence at the end of it. Because if they get it wrong, it could mean people's lives, particularly when dealing in defence. So, it is one of those things where, what are we trying to prepare someone for? Whether it's dealing with sensitive situation or subject, or whether it's dealing with some critical training, that level of respect for the training needs to be upheld.
And we build in those consequences in the games that we've been doing in this side. So again, it's story driven. So think of it as almost like this choose your own adventures where people end up with the claw of trying not to turn back to their previous page. But in this case, because it's in a digital context, what you're doing is you have consequences from making a decision, but you've also, going back to that guide from the side, you have guidance to be able to go, this is what this is. People may not realise whilst they're doing the training that what they're doing is preparing themselves for when they get to do it for real. I can put my hand up on things that I've learned over the years and I've gone, I probably will never need to do that first aid or whatever. As soon as it actually comes through and you have a moment that you actually need to put it into place, I've done this, I've seen this, I've experienced this to enough or close enough to give you some semblance of having some lived experience, even if it's in a virtual space, as opposed to starting cold with no expertise in it whatsoever, or I've read a page on a PowerPoint slide once.
My last but one question is more because I've got a slight background in digital learning or e-learning. I was part of the e-learning team, and then COVID happened. We saw a lot of people instead sort of move their classrooms onto Teams or Zoom and go, I'm just going to make a PowerPoint or put in a PDF, hand it out, and I'll do a Zoom call for an hour, and that's e-learning. We don't need you to create a whole course for us or a blended approach or animations. I'll just upload this. Part one is, what is your thoughts on that? Sort of did that sort of have a detrimental effect to sort of the people coming through, the new recruits coming through? And two, are you seeing a sort of a backtrack on that now, a few years on? Are you seeing some people come back saying, this probably wasn't the best idea we had. Can you make some e-learning for us so we can catch up, please?
To me, it's one of those things where, and it goes back to what we spoke about earlier about the fact that the training needs to be fit for purpose. Now, taking a PowerPoint or taking a lesson and just chucking it on, is that e-learning? It's a form of e-learning. Is it fit for purpose? Well, it depends what you're wanting to get out of it. What are you wanting to have behavioural change? Are you wanting to have knowledge transfer? You might get some knowledge transfer. Are you going to get behavioural change? Definitely not. However, there was a time and place for it. Before joining, in between leaving the army and joining CDS, I worked at a school, and it was funny enough during COVID times. And when I was working at the school, we had to go to a non-based platform, to which we did onto Google Classrooms, and we ran all our lessons from there. But what we did before that, we saw the smoke signals coming, and we were like, we better do something about this. So we upskilled all our staff so that they were able to kind of actually teach their lessons online, but actually make their lessons interactive. So we gave them the tools they needed in order to adapt to their new environment, and so that they could then actually facilitate a better learning experience for their students. Now, I know not all schools did that, and I know not all educational training establishments did that afterwards. Fortunately, we were the kind of establishment that were a bit forward thinking in that way. Fast forward to now being in the or being in CDS-DS, when we're approaching looking at learning, every learning solution needs to be a solution or the solution to what you're trying to deliver. So if we are trying to develop an e-learning process, taking the product, so for instance, if a client comes to us and says, can you bung this on, so it's an online process, our first reaction is like, why do you want to? You know, what's the purpose? Why are we doing this? And actually, yes, we can adapt those, but we need to make this engaging. We need to make this so the student is going to want to be part of this experience. And therefore, I think we have a very different approach when dealing with these things. And you're 100% right, you know, just taking that PowerPoint and bunging it on, yeah, someone can bounce through it, but how's that any different to them necessarily going and reading a book? Only with a book, you know, there might be a footnote or something along those lines that tells you, all right, there's the reference that we received for that bit of information. So now you can go and research that reference if you have questions about it. You know, when there's a PowerPoint, it's a couple of messages, but there's nothing behind that. There's no knowledge. There's nothing. But that's because there was a human being behind that PowerPoint that provided that extra understanding. That's now been lost. So you need to think about, and actually there was a project we've been working on where we had to think about that element of, well, you're not going to have it, if someone wants to ask a question, they no longer have someone to ask the question to. So what can we do to provide that? Is there now like a button that they now need to press? And if they've got additional questions, we've almost asked the questions and provided answers for those questions. So it delves deeper in, or however it's going to be, or reference material. So if they want to go off and do a bit of research, they can. You provide that. So you now need to think about what's the additional elements we can put into the e-learning.
Which it sort of feeds into the next bit where you're asking what impact does it have from a design perspective, and you may smile at this one, Karl, in the sense of it's the classic thing of my son's got Photoshop, he's a graphic designer. Or we've got After Effects or whatever it is, they know how to do video production. And I think absolutely fantastic that people are trying to do things. They were in a situation, especially if we go back to the COVID times, everyone was in a situation of we will do the best we can. Not everyone is trained or skilled in the method of all the media, the design tools that come through from it. What they've done is they've probably uploaded a bulk of whatever it is into a PowerPoint, into a PDF, into just Word files, into documents. They may have had more creativity, they may have looked to see what other people are doing and build on it, but it's an unknown unknown. Whereas if you're using skilled people like ourselves that are actually doing it, we're looking at the work that people are actually building out, and they may have just done this information dump. And it's information, not training, because it's everything. You've lacked that person that's coming through. So it's then taking it into the bite-sized chunks with that time-poor world. It's bringing it into the right devices so people can access it. If we take it into schools, because you mentioned schools, they live with their phones in their hands. Don't take them away, put them in their hands, put the right methodology into it. If you don't want them using phones, what have they got access to? What are they in the room with? How do you engage with them? It's not some 40, 50-year-old man that's making the thing. You incorporate your audience into what you actually want to do. So you take that information dump and then you look at how you can actually change it into something that's got substance, engaging, value. And we're a terrible, terrible world in the sense of looks do matter. There's a lot of stuff out there where they've actually got good info badly presented. And if you put that in front of somebody along those lines, if it hasn't got that polish or if it hasn't been laid out in that right way, and this is where the skills come in with typography and methodology and pacing and time and just being able to read to the audience when you're producing, and I'm going to say multimedia, because multimedia was a thing 10, 15 years ago, was the big buzzword when you were talking about creative design. it changed into everyone going into their own little specialisms, and it's come full circle. Because people realise with Reels and with everything that we've got, that you can actually got lots of different methods of being able to actually deliver information and training, and we use them.
Last question. Where do you see the future of digital learning and the learning scape?
Well, that's the thing, I go back to when I was at school and they had an overhead projector. Don't get me wrong.
It's not going back to that.
I still think the overhead projector is a fantastic way of demonstrating waves. Still one of my favourite lessons of all time. But the reality is, I no longer need that. I can now have it in my pocket. I can now have it. So I think when we look at technology, it's that thing of when we think about how fast we've gone and how far we've gone in such a short period of time, the reality is we're on this trajectory curve that is going to, what learning looks like today in 20 years' time is going to be potentially unrecognizable. Yes, we'll still probably have many of the methods and approaches we have today, but the innovations and the new ways, and new thoughts and new ideas that are going to come in, even the platforms that we use, will completely change. So I think there's always going to be a necessity to innovate and come up with new ideas and new ways of delivery. But at the end of the day, it's always going to come down to what the requirement is. And, we will probably see huge changes in even the skills and the knowledge that people are going to need to have. And so we'll see huge developments in that area as well, as to actually, how do we help develop skills that potentially previously would have only been learnt in a workshop, very hands-on. Well, are we going to be able to tactorially deal with that using artificial intelligence, in the future? Who knows? I imagine, I'm sitting there and someone's already developing some way of designing training through using coordination, so that we're tapping into that kinesthetic approach. Who knows? I think there is vast ways, but I think the trick for us is to ensure that as these technologies and different approaches are coming out, applying that same filter that we were saying, that the customer needs to be sitting there going, well, is this the right thing? Is this fitting for what we need? We need to apply that to ourselves. And I was chatting to a headmaster of a school the other day, and particularly around this mobile phone issues that they've been having in schools recently. And one of the things he was saying is that their approach was slightly different in the fact that they were looking at it from, a technological solution to a technological problem. And I think that was a great way of putting it. And therefore, if you're going to be posed with these, as opposed to think about the way we've always done it, well, maybe we look at, what is a better way of approaching it now that we've got this this new solution or new approach that we've got.
And I think from the kind of side of the design side of the future, it's already creeping the way that it will go. You touched on it with the AI. We already incorporate AI and creative skills together to blend. And I think the biggest issue you're going to have in the e-learning industry at the moment is everybody tries to jump on the bandwagon of the shiniest thing. It's nothing new. They did it when it was gamification as the buzzword. They did it when it was LMSs. They've done it with regards to VR. They've done it with regards to now AI. And I think what it is having that honesty from our perspective to actually say, what is the right kind of AI to lean into? How do you use it? Is it a tool? Is it safe to use? What way are they actually incorporating their technology to incorporate it from the data behind the scenes? Where's their server stored? All the kind of everything from a secure, because we work with secure environments, right the way down to how do we utilize this as a tool in our tool belt to be able to actually tackle it. Also, I think the future of it in the sense of people will use, you mentioned this much earlier on, they'll use their phones with regards to ChatGPT and AI, if they can, if they're in an environment where they can have their phone and use those tools. And even if they can't, people will probably try and find a way. So what you'll be looking to do is find a way where you add value on top of that. And I think that's where you would actually be looking at, in the sense of, you're going to get bombarded with info. How do you take that bombard of info and turn that into nuanced, quick and adaptable, non-memory game learning?
And that, I think, is it.
Cool.
Thank you both for coming and being part of this. I have to do my piece to camera now, which is always the hardest bit. So if you've been listening on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, or YouTube, thank you for listening. Sorry for the sound difference and also the location change. We're down in Sandhurst this week, so the next episode should be back in the usual spot. If you can give us a follow, a like, a subscribe. If you're on YouTube, there's a notification bell that notifies you every time there's a new episode. And we are at DSEI is quickly coming up. So DSEI on the second week of September. If you are there, come and see our stand. I will put a little bit of text underneath to say where our stand is, because off the top of my head, I cannot remember where our stand is. But come along, you'll see my pretty face there all week. And thank you guys for coming along.
Brilliant. They can even come and get your signature.
Yes, come and get my signature, because 3 episodes in, go on, super famous now.
Of course.